talk a little bit about like why it's important to protect your equity at early stage?
We really like to make investments where we basically say, okay, by the time this money runs out, you're going to get back to break even or default alive, to where you won't need capital again. And I think that's a really good strategy for founders because it's so much better to be in a position where you don't need the capital. That's basically how you avoid ending up owning 3% of your company, is to never put your business in a situation where you have to have that capital. The other way to do that, if you actually have a business that needs capital, is there's this increasing range of new options that are like a little bit less like non-dilutive. So you're not selling this long-term equity in your company, and you've got folks like Clearbank that sort of do so for a little bit more mature businesses that are funding their marketing spend. There's revenue-based financing, and there's what we do, which is closer to a profit share. But in all those situations, what you're not doing is basically just selling a long-term perpetual chunk of your company.
I think it depends. So we had a point where revenue had to be the most important thing in our business because we were self-funding. So my co-founder and I freelanced to fund the business in the beginning. And that meant that every single decision we made had to be about that revenue. And there's some things that, some ways that's a good thing because we got to a point where we have enough revenue to be running our business and be sustainable. But it also meant that we couldn't invest in long-term bets. And so this much bigger picture of what Moonlight could be was harder to act on without some external money. And so bigger things like how do you build a community, how do you get people engaged, how do you bring in diverse candidates, all of these things that maybe aren't gonna touch the bottom line right now, but matter a lot in the future of the company. That's why we think that only focusing on revenue isn't always good, and why we might consider bringing in external factors that will help us get to that point.
Yeah. And Zeina, do you see that on iFund Women, that they primarily turn to crowdfunding to avoid having to give up too much equity?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people turn to crowdfunding. They might be, in a very early stage where they want to pre-sell or pre-tail their collection or their production or whatever, something like that. But on the other, and then there's also the marketing benefits. But on the other side, there's people who just don't want to go into debt. They don't want to, they've already bootstrapped to a certain extent. And their product just might not be VC appropriate, or they just might not be at the stage where they want to give up that equity. I think it's so important that people are able to get given that time to sustainably grow in a way, and really kind of go back to what is it that they're doing, why are they doing it, before they do have too much pressure on them to grow in a certain way with too many expectations. I think you're saying how you can get focused on revenue. I think the problem with getting investors where there's equity involved is that it actually puts too much focus on the revenue as well afterwards. And so it's finding that happy medium of saying, okay, well, how can we get a little bit of help, but without someone sort of over our shoulder that we have to be beholden to while we develop this really awesome new second part of our product that's going to be great and it has all these other benefits, but we're not going to necessarily see that return the revenue until further down the line. With an investor, sometimes you're not really given that luxury as much. There's just a lot of pressure to kind of put growth projections out right away.
Yeah.
And a quick point on that, I think that's also about finding investors who believe in the same vision that you have. So if you find someone who doesn't have your vision and you take their money anyways, you're going to go down a path you didn't want to go down. So it's about really making sure you feel aligned. And I think most people have a gut feeling when they talk to someone on if you have the same vision for the future.
I think that's a really important point. We have, I think, this sense of constantly sort of framing new funding options as being like alternatives to venture capital, because it's taken this sort of I think undue outsized influence in the world of like the internet and software. Yeah, and it just happened because early on that was the only source of capital that was in there, because there's no underlying collateral in an e-commerce business or a SaaS business, and so they were the only game in town. But often I don't really feel like these new forms of capital are alternatives to venture capital. I would say 9 out of 10 deals that we look at are in really interesting little niches where you can build an incredibly profitable, business for a team of 10 people that just doesn't have a big enough market for a venture capitalist. So we're not like competing with VC. We're not saying, oh, don't take VC, take what we're saying. It's just like, it's what we're trying to offer or nothing. And so I think instead of like alternative form of capital, it's more just like this increasing array of new ways to get funding that is aligned with the kind of business that you want to build.
And Ash, I want to add, like, diversifying how you get your capital is really important. So a lot of people who are crowdfunding are doing that with the intention to also raise VC dollars, or also raise a seed round, or also take out a loan. There's not really one solution that fits all your needs, and you will continue to need money for a while. So it's good to kind of approach and diversify the different ways you do get that.